Где?
Одна. Не двухспальная, одна.
Где?
Как бы заходить к нам.
Okay, we'll talk later.
Okay, you ready? Parashat Vayishlach. Let's see what we can discover, some insights. There are a lot of different things to talk about, and we'll skip around like we always do. Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Befonov El Esav Ochiv Arzo Seir Sedei Ado. So we're going to go back and forth, but Yaakov sends Malachim. Rashi says Malachim, not just regular messengers, real angels. And of course, the next year I'm going to talk a little bit more. I already started to prepare it. Where did Yaakov have permission to send real angels? You know, angels are not at your beck and call. You know, we don't use Kohanim to do our work. We can't call angels to do our work. It's just not the way the world is structured. Some people say that he sent angels. What angels? The angels of the mitzvahs that he did. Every time you do a mitzvah, you create an angel. And that's why he says, Im lovon garti v'tayarg mitzvah shamarti. I kept the 613 mitzvahs. So what angels did he send? He sent his own angels that he created for the mitzvahs that he did. Now, Yaakov is not sure at this point if Esav is trying to befriend him or is he angry at him. He doesn't know. At this point, he just sent a expeditionary force. The pasuk, the Medrash seems to imply that the pasuk tells us Esav had a long memory. He called his land Seir. Seir comes from goat skins. I remember what my brother did. He put on these goat skins and he imitated me. I remember that. Seir. Edo. Edo means red. The bean soup. I remember the bean soup my brother served me when I was hungry. And in exchange, he took the firstborn, the Bechorah. So the names of Seir and Edom give you the impression that Esav has a long memory. Okay. The Vilna Gaon has an interesting gematria. The Vilna Gaon from the Targum Yonasan brings down a gematria that Vayira Yaakov Ma'od. Yaakov was very afraid. Ma'od is gematria 45. He says, you know what else is 45? Kibud Av, honoring your father. Why was Yaakov so afraid? Because he knew Esav had one mitzvah in his arsenal. What was that one mitzvah? Kibud Av, honoring his father. And Kibud Av is gematria 45, so he was very much afraid. He brings down a pasuk from a few weeks ago. You know, when you give tzedakah, the word is vinatnu, and that's called a palindrome. You can read it frontwards and backwards the same way. As if when you give, you get back. When Yaakov prepared food for his father, it says, Vayove el Aviv. But when Esav brought the food, it says, Vayovo la'aviv. Vayove la'aviv. He brought it to his father. Vayove la'aviv has the same letters this way as this way. So when Esav brought it, the pasuk uses letters that can be read frontwards and backwards. Everything that Esav did came back to him as a reward. So Yaakov was afraid. He was afraid that Esav had certain merit. The schus that Esav had was that of Kibud Ava'im. Okay, goes a little bit further. We talk about what happened with Yaakov and Shechem. And we know that Dinah was taken. And we're jumping ahead and then we're going to come back to the confrontation with Esau. Dinah was taken. So the Gemara asks, why was Dinah taken? So the Medrash, the Gemara, the Meforshim explain, it was a punishment to Yaakov. Why was it a punishment to Yaakov? Because when Yaakov met his brother Esau, what did he do with Dinah? He put her where?
Yes.
In a box. He hid her in a box. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want Esau to see her, because he didn't want Esau to want to marry her. So they asked the obvious question, is that so terrible? Which father would want their daughter to marry Esau? Nobody. Esau was 97 years old at that time. He had many wives already. Dinah was a young girl. She probably was 20. Esau was no tzaddik. Dinah was raised in the house of Yaakov Avinu. So why is Yaakov being punished? So the short answer that they give is that I guess we underestimate Esau. We assume Esau is a really bad guy. Maybe he was. But it seems from the psukim, nowhere does it say Esau is a Rasha. And we know that Yitzchak loved Esau, and Yitzchak saw in Esau potential. And we know that the plan was that Yaakov would have 6 children and Esau would have 6 children. And Esau could have been one of the fathers. So the Meforshim say, it's from the Darshan of Yerushalayim. He says that you're using your common sense to say no father would want to marry his daughter to Esau. I hear you. He says, but you underestimate the power of a good wife. If a person really has a good wife, she can change the husband. That means Esau had good qualities. You put on top of that a good wife who really can make the difference in her husband, things could have turned around differently. The world could have been different. There might not have been Edom. There might not have been the Golus of Edom. There might not have been all the horrible things that are happening. That means we are very quick to assume that, no father would want to marry his daughter to Esau. But the Meforshim seem to imply that that's not so true, that there was something there to be married to. And we're going to go into some of the other things in a moment, but Yaakov was punished for that. He was punished that his daughter was subject to a lot of different things. Okay. In the Psukim, the Rashi seems to go back and forth with 2 different approaches. I'll give you an example. Yaakov says to the messenger, say to my brother, Im Lavan Garti, I spent the last 22 years with Lavan. Okay. Rashi says, Lo na'asisi sar v'choshuv. In those 22 years, and it's more than 22 years, because he spent 14 years in Shem Ve'aver, so 34 years. He says, Esau, you're angry at me. Why are you angry? I took the firstborn. I took the blessings, the barachot. Look at me. 34 years later. Do I have a country? No. Am I a general? No. Am I a president? No. Lo na'asisi sar v'choshuv. I'm not an officer. I'm not important. Elager. I'm running from place to place. I don't even have a house. I'm living in tents. Eincha kedai lisnoasi. There's no reason to hate me al birkos avicha sheberachani, because of the brachos that our father gave us. Because it's not true. Didn't happen. That's one approach. And Rashi usually goes with one approach. Throughout the Parsha, and next year I'll go into more detail, he goes with 2 approaches. Then he says, Dover Acher, another approach. Im Lavon Garti, Garti has the same letters as Taryag. I lived with Lavan, the big Russia, but I kept all 613 mitzvahs. So what's he saying? He gives a 2-point message. The first part is, you're angry at me. What for? There's no reason to be angry. The second message seems to say, don't start up with me. Because I kept all 613 mitzvahs in the last 34 years, and therefore Hashem is going to protect me. So if you start up with me, you're not going to win. I control angels. I can do whatever I want. So there's 2 approaches. The first approach is, I'm a nothing, so I'm not worth your time. The second approach is, I'm so powerful, don't even think it. Like 2 extremes. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, he comes and he asks a question, and he brings down from the Ikvei Erev. It's a sefer, Ikvei Erev, the Siforno. He says, when Yaakov says to Esau, what do you want? The brachot were not fulfilled. Everybody knows that the father's blessings were not immediate. They were long-term. They were not going to be fulfilled until, 300 years, 400 years, when the Beit HaMikdash was going to be built, when the Moshe Rabbeinu came, when the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael. So, telling Esau the brachot have not been fulfilled, that doesn't mean much at this point, because we know that Yitzchak was thinking in the future, not in right now. So Moshe says, you have to know who you're talking to. What kind of a personality was Esau? Did Esau think long-term or short-term? Short-term. When he came, he says to his brother, I'm so hungry, I'm going to drop dead, I'm going to die, I got no future. A person who talks that way is a person who thinks short-term. Yaakov understood that Esav's brain was wired short term. So Yaakov says, hey, brother, short term, what did I get? Nothing. Long term, you're not worried about, I'm not worried about. You're worried about what's going to happen in 300 years, you could care less. So therefore, I'm not going to even mention it. So Moshe says, Yaakov knew very well who he was talking to. He was talking to Esav. Mr. Esav is the short-term guy. The short-term guy says, what are you doing today? Do you have the brachos today? Are you rich today? Are you important today? The answer was no, 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 no. That was enough of an answer. Now, Yaakov had an interesting message. Yaakov said, we talked about this a few weeks ago, Yaakov said to Esav, Yeshli shor v'chamor. Shor is Yosef, which represents Mashiach ben Yosef, who will take care of Esav. Chamor represents Mashiach ben David, who will take care of Yishmael in the end of days. So, basically, Yaakov said to Esav, I'm covered, I'm protected. I'm long-term, I know what's going to happen to the end of the world. I saw all the different exiles. I know what's the future. I know what's in store. Therefore, I am covered, he says. I know exactly what's going to happen. And therefore, Yeshli shor v'chamor. I have a shor, I have a chamor. He had other animals as well, and he brought gifts. But the message was, I am protected. Now, it's very, very interesting, how Yaakov viewed his family. He had many parts to his family. He had Levi, who represented Kahuna, the Beit HaMikdash. He had Yehuda, which represented Malchus. He had Yosef, which also represented a certain level of royalty, as we know in Mitzrayim. And much of the future of Klal Yisrael was based on Yosef and Mashiach ben Yosef. He brings down an interesting story with Reb Chaim Volozhin. And because he had Yisachar and Zevulun, the team. One learned, one went to work, one supported Torah. He brings down a very interesting story with Reb Chaim Volozhin. Now let me explain to you who Reb Chaim Volozhin is. Volozhin is a town in Eastern Europe, probably in Vilna area. Volozhin was known as the mother of all the yeshivas. That means Reb Chaim Volozhin was a student of the Vilna Gaon. So he lived in the 1700s. With the permission of the Vilna Gaon, he started the Volozhin Yeshiva. That yeshiva had as its Rosh Yeshivas the Netziv, and eventually the Briskerov. Then the Briskerov left, Rabbi Soloveitchik left, and went to the city of Brisk. Many of the students from that Volozhin yeshiva, when they left and branched out, started yeshivas all over Europe. But Volozhin was the start. And from there, all the lines found its way. Just like many of the yeshivas here came from Slobodka. Ner Yisrael came from Slobodka. Rav Hutner came from Slobodka. Rav Aaron Kotler. A lot of these places trace their roots back to the altar from Navardik and from Slobodka. And that's where the modern day is. I mean, Ner Yisrael, I learned in Ner Yisrael, so it was interesting. Ner Yisrael just had a dinner, and at the dinner someone mentioned an interesting idea. When Ner Yisrael started, they allowed college. That means it was a yeshiva where you could go to the yeshiva, you could go to college. Most yeshivas did not. Telz did not allow college. Lakewood did not allow college. The other yeshivas did not allow college. Rav Ruderman was once asked why he allowed college. So Rav Ruderman says, I want to build a city. Baltimore had a Jewish community, but not a very religious Jewish community. He says, I want to build a city. So I have to ask myself, what do you need in the city? Tell me what you need. Well, you need doctors. You need lawyers. You need bankers. You need people who can run restaurants and bakeries and grocery stores. That means I need people that have a college education. That means I want to build Torah. That's for sure. But Torah is a small part of the city. I got to build the city. So if I want my Torah people to be able to have children here and the children should be healthy, I need doctors. I need lawyers. I need real estate people. I need all different types of people in my city. And that's what Baltimore is today. Baltimore is a Torah city where you can have graduates of Ner Yisrael that live in Baltimore that have all these professions. So Rav Ruderman saw not the small picture. He had a big dream. He just wasn't building a yeshiva, he was building a town. He was building a state. He was building a massive organization. That was Reb Chaim Volozhin. So you have to appreciate that if Reb Chaim Volozhin was a student of the Vilna Gaon, he was brilliant. He was a smart person. He was a brilliant man. The story goes, and the story is told by the Chafetz Chaim, that one time Reb Chaim Volozhin was learning in the Beis Medrash, and he was learning Masechet Kelim. Masechet Kelim is part of Taharos. It's Mishnah. It's very difficult. Even with the art scroll where you have the English and the pictures, it requires a lot of concentration. It's not easy to go through. And he was stuck. He just didn't get it. He just couldn't figure it out. He was stuck. And he was very upset. And he came home that night, and when he went to sleep, he was very troubled. In the night, when he was sleeping, he had a dream. And in the dream, the local tailor, who used to, fix clothing, the tailor, who lived down the block from the yeshiva, came to him in a dream and said to him, I understand the Rosh Yeshiva is having difficulty with this Mishnah. I'll teach it to you, he says. And he teaches him the whole Mishnah and explains it perfectly.
In the dream.
In the dream. So Reb Chaim Volozhin afterwards says to the tailor, he says, let's say his name was Motel. I don't want to use Motel the tailor because that comes from Fiddler on the Roof. Moshe, the tailor, Moshe, he says, you never learned in yeshiva your whole life. How do you know this Mishnah? How is it possible that you know and you can explain it to me so clearly when you never learned in the yeshiva your whole life? You are an am ha'aretz. You're ignorant. You don't. How would you possibly know? So Moshe said to him, he says, Rosh Yeshiva, let me tell you, he says, in my store I had a little pushka, tzedakah box. And people put money in there. Once a week I would empty it. Now I was poor myself. So if there was $10 in that little box at the end of the week, I took 5 and I gave 5 to the kollel. That's all I did. Every week.
50-50.
50-50. Next week there was $20. I took 10. I gave 10 to the kollel. When I came up to Shemayim, all those kollel guys that I helped support with my $5 and $10 became my chavrusa. And they taught me the entire Torah. In a day, I knew as much as if I spent my whole life learning in yeshiva, because I supported Torah. And the proof is, I just taught you.
Well, he stole half of it.
He didn't steal it. He said he was poor. It was a tzedakah box. And he was poor. He was a tailor. He was very poor. So he took half for himself because he was a poor man. And the other half he gave to the yeshiva. So Reb Chaim Volozhin walked away and he says, I never imagined, he says, I never imagined you support Torah, you become a Rosh Yeshiva. That's what it is, And he brings down a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Achel was a terrible person, committed all these crimes, but he supported Torah. So the Gemara says that in Shemayim, Hashem said, he supported Torah, he committed this year 1,000 Avedot, I'm going to erase half of them. 50% gone, just like that. Why? Because he supported Torah. And that's not a bad deal. It's not a bad deal. So Reb Chaim Volozhin says, I never understood that. So, when Yaakov came, and there was Esav, it was very interesting how the dynamics. Next week I'm going to go into it a little bit more from a different angle, as you'll see later today. But, Yaakov, he approached it from, he covered all bases. I'll give you an example. It says that he sent a gift to his brother Esav. What is the Hebrew word for gift that the Torah uses?
Matana.
Normally, a Hebrew word for gift is matana. But that doesn't matter what it says over here. It says in the Torah, Vayishlach mincha. He sent a mincha. Mincha is a gift. But the Meforshim say there's a message there. Yaakov said to his brother, what is your protection? You're close to our father? Got it. What tefillah did Yitzchok write? Mincha. I daven mincha every day, he says. When was the last time you daven mincha? That's what he said to his brother. He says, tell him I'm giving a gift. But he doesn't use the word matana. He uses the word mincha. As if to say, remember mincha? Remember when you were in yeshiva, you used to daven mincha? In the last 50 years, Esav, how many times did you daven mincha? Probably 0. I daven mincha every day. So who do you think your father is going to protect now? The guy who davens the mincha that he wrote, or you who never davens mincha? So we're going to see that there are a lot of subtle messages, very carefully chosen words that Yaakov Avinu uses. The Abarbanel says that Yaakov, when he heard the report that Esav is coming, marching at him with 400 men, he really got afraid. Now, it's interesting, Yaakov's psyche. If Esav is marching with 400 men, Yaakov concludes that his father must have died. Why does he think that?
Because if father was alive,
He wouldn't do it. Remember, he always understood that Esav was always saying, I can't wait till my father dies and I'm going to get even with you. So, when Yaakov hears that Esav is marching with 400 soldiers, one of the first things, and that's not true, of course, Yitzchak was still alive, and Yitzchak would be alive until they sold Joseph. But if you're Yaakov, one of the first things that comes to your mind is, I've been away for the last 34 years, there's a good chance my father died. It wasn't true, but he got nervous, okay, he got nervous. The Abarbanel says there was a prophecy from Rivka. Rivka says, I don't want both of you to die the same day, that Yaakov and Esav would die the same day. So what Yaakov did was he split up his camp into two, and he put them a day apart. He put all the servants and the sheep here, and all the family back here, thinking Esav will come here first, and if Esav fights and kills Yaakov, he'll die before he gets to the family. What happened was just the opposite. Esav comes marching, sees the camp, sees all the cattle, says, I don't want that, and he goes around from the back. So who's the first camp that he meets? The family. So Yaakov had a plan, but the plan didn't work. That's what the Abarbanel says. It's interesting in Abarbanel. That Yaakov had a plan, but it didn't work. It didn't work. So therefore, Yaakov had to find another alternative, and of course he meets Esav, and there's a few things that happened before that, which we're going to talk about very soon. Okay. Let's go into a little bit more of a complicated thing. A little bit more complicated. Something very, very interesting. If you look at Perek Lamed Gimel Pasuk Chof, it says as follows. I'll read you the Pasuk. It says, Vayatzev Sham Mizbeach, Yaakov built the Mizbeach. This was after he fought the Esav, and he fought the angel, and he came to Shechem, and he settled, and he bought the land, and he built things, and he built the marketplace, and he gave them currency. So it says that he made a Mizbeach, Vayikra lo Kel Elokei Yisrael. He called it the God of Israel. Rashi right away jumps in, he says, we don't give things names. We don't call a Mizbeach a name. Yaakov didn't say to the Mizbeach, you're God of Israel. Forget about that. Brings down a Gemara. Amar Rabbi Lozer. Minayin, where do we see that Hashem called Yaakov God? Shenemar, Vayikra lo. Hashem called him, Yaakov, El. You are a God. Who's saying that? Elokei Yisrael, the God of Israel. So we know Moshe was an Ish Elokim, a man of God. Yaakov is called a man of God. And how do we know this? Hashem changed his name from Yaakov to Yisrael. In Yaakov's name is the letters Aleph Lamed, El. So Yaakov is called a God. So Yaakov fights the Malach of Esav. He's successful. And then he is called a God. He's godlike. And the Medrash makes a lot of comparisons between Yaakov and Hashem. That's why Yaakov's image is on the Kisei HaKavod, because he's godlike. Okay. Rashi says that Yaakov was very upset. He was afraid he might be killed, or he might be forced to kill Acherim, others. So there's a sefer Moleh HaOmer. Why was Yaakov so worried that he might kill somebody? Let's say you're being attacked, and you have to defend yourself. So Yaakov has to defend himself. So let's say Yaakov kills 5 men in self-defense. What's the crime? No crime. So why is Yaakov afraid? Very interesting. There's a halacha. If a Kohen kills someone, even by accident, car accident, He cannot do the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. He's pasul. So Yaakov said, why did I go through all this trouble to get the firstborn? Because in those days, who were the Kohanim? The Bechor, the firstborn. So now, I work so hard to become the firstborn, so I should be able to do the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. If I'm forced in war to take a person's life, I become pasul, so it's all worthless. That's what he was afraid of. He says, Esav is going to force me to fight. Yeah. What's so terrible about that? If I have to fight, I could kill someone. And what happens if I kill someone? If I kill someone, I'm going to become pasul for the avodah. If I become pasul for the avodah, what have I accomplished? My whole goal, I always tell people, forget about the battle. Look at the war. You don't have to win the battle. You have to win the war. I always tell people that. You have to win the war. Okay. Listen to the following thing. It's a beautiful thing. I want you to hear this very carefully. Listen very, very carefully. When Esau finally came to Yaakov, what did Esau want? So the short answer is, Esau wanted to kill Yaakov. And maybe that's true. Esau is Amalek, Halacha, Esau soned Yaakov. But many people say Esau had no intention to kill Yaakov. He wanted to smother him in love. Yaakov said, save me from my brother, from Esau. Means I don't want either one. I don't want his friendship. I don't want his anger. Like we say to the bee, I don't want your sting, I don't want your honey. That means Yaakov didn't want Esau's love either. He wanted to be left alone. And that's what he said to Esau. For 22 years I was in Lavan's house, and you know what? After 22 years, Lavan and I never became friends. Even at the very end, Lavan wanted to kill me. I just never learned from Lavan. I have no desire to be part of a person who's evil. I just don't want to be part of evil. Okay. Now, what's next? It says that an angel fought with him, the angel of Esau, and it kicked up dust. What does dust do? It makes things dirty. Listen to this. Very, very interesting. Listen to this. If you were, for example, in school or in work or whatever it is, or let's say you're in the Beis Medrash, and all of a sudden someone runs into the Beis Medrash and says, there's two people fighting outside. Now you don't see the people fighting outside. You just, you're in the Beis Medrash and you hear two people are fighting outside. So what do? You run outside, and one of the person is walking away, twirling his keys, singing a song. And the other guy is lifting himself off the ground. His foot is broken. He can barely walk. He's bloody all over. If someone says to you, who won? What would the answer be? The guy who's singing, right? The guy who's singing and walking away is the winner. The guy who can't walk and who's full of blood lost. We don't have to see the fight to figure that out. Yaakov fights the angel. Come sunrise, the angel says, you got to let me go because it's my turn to sing to Hashem. So we come there, and what do we see? The angel is walking away, singing songs of praise to Hashem. Yaakov can't walk, his foot is damaged, and he's probably bloody all over. Who won the fight?
Angel.
Now, when we learned the Parasha, who did we think won the fight?
Yaakov.
We thought Yaakov won the fight. So, what's going on over here? It seems like Esau and his angel won the fight, but we know Yaakov won the fight. But the angel's walking away singing songs, and Yaakov can't walk. His foot is damaged, and he's bloody. So Rav Moshe Meir Weiss said a very wonderful, wonderful insight. He says, when you fight the Yetzer Hara, the fact that you fight him means you already won. That means when the Yetzer Hara comes to you and says, do an Aveira, and you go right away and you do it, you lost. But if you have enough strength to say no, even if he wears you down, but the fact that you just fight him, you resist him, you feel bad about it, you feel guilty, it's wrong, I don't want to do it, he says that makes you a winner. Even if your foot is hurt, even if you're bloody, even if he's singing songs, makes no difference. When you resist the Yetzer Hara, your resistance makes you a winner. And then he says, just remember one thing though. The Yetzer Hara doesn't go for the big things. He goes for the little things. I'll give you an example. When did he attack Yaakov? Because Yaakov went back for small jars. The Yetzer Hara, I'll give you, this is an example that they use. You're driving at night, and you're driving home from Washington or Baltimore, whatever it is, and your car needs gas and you're hungry. So you pull into one of these gas stations on the New Jersey Turnpike, and you fill up with gas, and there's a convenience store. So you go in, you're hungry. Pick up a bottle of Coke, that's okay, Coke is fine. But you want to look at the potato chips? Nah, you don't want potato chips, you want a piece of cake. You want some cake. So you go, and you look, you pick up a piece of cake, there's a hechsher on it, but you don't recognize it. It's not like the OU or the Chaf K or the Circle K. There's a kosher seal, but you don't recognize it. You don't know if it's reliable or not. But you're hungry. So your mind already starts working overtime. It's probably okay because there's a kosher seal on it. I don't recognize it. Maybe it's conservative or reform. Maybe it's not reliable. Let me look at the ingredients. So you start reading the ingredients. Of course, half the ingredients you don't even understand what they are. And your stomach is growling. That's your Yetzer Hara. See, the Yetzer Hara is not telling you, hey, on that shelf are ham sandwiches. He's not telling you that because that's ridiculous. You're not going to buy a ham sandwich. The Yetzer Hara is not trying to get you to buy the ham sandwich because that's a battle that doesn't even begin. He gets you to pick up a piece of cake that you're hungry and you want, and there's frosting on it, you like it, smells good, and it says kosher, but you don't recognize it. Okay?
Trick.
It's a trick. It's a gray area. It's a fine line. That's the Yetzer Hara. Now what do you do? Now what do you do? Pachim Ketanim. That's when the Yetzer Hara attacked Yaakov. For the little jar. Nothing big. Nothing fancy. Small stuff. So you have to know that. So if you put down the piece of cake and you buy something with an OU, fine. If you put down the piece of cake and you buy the potato chips that you didn't want because it was going to make you thirsty, but you're going to buy it because it has an OU on it, okay, you won. Even if you stand there and you hesitate and you put it back, you're already winning because the Yetzer Hara can't push you over. You're already winning. That's the Yetzer Hara. Then he says, what's all the dust? Listen to this. He says, ask a person, tell me something that's beautiful. Okay? So, Sarah, we're going to pick on you. Because you're beautiful. Sarah, if I asked you, tell me something in the world that's beautiful, what would you say? Come on, guess. Tell me something
Flowers.
that when you see, what?
Flowers.
Give that man a cigar. Flowers is the number one answer. Okay? Would you agree sometimes flowers are really beautiful? You ask 100 people, what is beautiful in life? The number one answer is flowers. The second answer is people. I guess there's People magazine, and People magazine puts out the 10 most beautiful people. You know, they have an edition like that, or the 20 most beautiful people. Okay. Another answer, maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, is sunrise or sunset. Seeing the sunrise
Sky,
or the sunset. Some people say seeing the ocean or the mountains. I grew up in Denver. The mountains were gorgeous. I went to St. Moritz in the Alps in Switzerland. It's breathtaking, the Grand Canyon. He says that's all the answers that an Esav gives. Because an Esav deals with the Gashmias, this world. He says nobody ever says, beautiful, a pair of tefillin. When I became bar mitzvah, my parents bought me a tefillin, cost $1,500. When I looked at it, I says, wow, that's beautiful. A talis, beautiful. A mezuzah on the door, that was gorgeous. I came to my mother's kitchen and she has separate dishes for fleischiks and milchiks. Beautiful. Nicer than flowers. He says, the Yetzer Hara, he knows what he's doing. He deals with the world, the Gashmias of the world. In the Gashmias of the world, we know what's beautiful. The mitzvos are never beautiful because the mitzvos are clouded in dust. He kicks up the dust. He makes sure that the that the person, he says to Yaakov, I may not get you, but I'm going to get your future generations. Yaakov says, how? He says, don't worry, in 2015, tefillin won't be beautiful. The iPhone will be beautiful. Or a nice sports car will be beautiful. No one is ever going to say, oh, the Shabbos table, wow, the Shabbos table was beautiful. No one's going to say that. They're always going to complain about the Shabbos table. It's too long, it's too this, it's too that. He says, there's things that are beautiful. The flowers are beautiful, he says. He says, that is what the Yetzer Hara does. The Yetzer Hara focuses on what the world thinks is beautiful to the exclusion of what the Torah world thinks is beautiful. Okay, the next thing I'm going to tell you is going to be interesting because even though this is a Gemara in Horayos, and it was probably written a good 2,000 years ago, you're probably going to say, wow, things are no different today than they were 2,000 years ago. Gemara's in Horayos Daf Yud Gimel. And this explains why Yaakov was worried that he was going to kill Acherim, other people. Look what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the Nasi. Now Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was the head of the yeshiva. He was the Nasi, head of all the Jewish people. They didn't like him. Very controversial. They tried to remove him a few times. Rabbi Meir, the great Tana Rabbi Meir, was the assistant Nasi, the vice Nasi. And Rabbi Natan, was the Av Bet Din. Okay. Mora says that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel walked into the Beis Medrash. What did everybody do when he walked in? They stood up. They all sat back down. A few minutes later, Rabbi Meir walked in. What did everybody do? They stood up. Sat back down. A few minutes later, Rabbi Natan walked in. What did everybody do? They stood up. Sat back down. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is sitting on his seat and he's saying to himself, they stood up for me the same way they stood up for Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Natan. But I'm the Nasi. I'm the president. I'm more important. They should be standing up for me better than for them. The next day, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Natan were not in the Beis Medrash. They were taken away on a different case. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, new rules. From now on, when I walk in, everybody stands up. But when the other rabbis walk in, you don't stand up. You just go like this. Half. We call that a tushy bump. I don't know what it's called. I'm not sure what it means. Because by rights, what are you supposed to do when a rabbi walks in? You're supposed to stand up, right? It doesn't make a difference. He's your rabbi, not your rabbi. You're supposed to stand up. Sorry if it's inconvenient, but that's respect. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no more. For me, you stand up, you get out of your seat. For everybody else, you just go like this. What do you do in yeshiva when the Rabbi walks in? You stand up. And if the Rosh Hashiva walks in, the head of the yeshiva walks in, or another rabbi walks in, you stand up. And if you don't stand up, if you're lazy and you go like this, what's going to happen to you? In my days, my father would make sure that I wouldn't be able to sit down. It's a little different in my day than in your day.
Belt?
What?
With the belt?
We won't go there. We're on tape. We won't go there. My father was a very good father. So, the next day, Rabbi Meir walks in, and Rabbi Natan walks in, and everybody does the little bump. And they say, what's going on over here? Guys, what's wrong? Your feet hurt you? They said, didn't you hear? New rules. New rules. Well, they're not happy. So they're talking, and they say, you know what? Tomorrow, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel has to give the shiur. We're going to fix it. He's going to come in with his notes. We're going to take his notes. And we're going to put Mesechet Uktzin on the table. Uktzin is a very difficult Masechta, very unusual. And we know that he knows nothing about Uktzin. So then we're all going to sit there to listen to this big tzaddik, big Talmud Chacham give a shiur, and he's not going to be able to talk. He's going to be so embarrassed, he's going to run out. We'll see if the people are going to stand up for him after that. This is what the Gemara says. Who overheard the plot was a young man by the name of Rabbi Yaakov. What was his name over here? Let's see if we can get his name correctly. Rabbi Yaakov ben Karshi. He overheard this. And he says, I understand the politics, yes, no, but I don't want my rabbi to be embarrassed. So that night, he goes to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's house. He says, Rabbi, I've been learning Masechet Uksi, and I don't understand something. Could you explain this to me? Could you explain that to me?
He didn't tell him.
And he bothered him the whole night. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel got no sleep, but the next day, one thing he knew backwards and forwards, Uksin. Comes into the base of Medrash, he sees his notes are gone, Uksin is there, and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nosson are sitting back like this, smiling, waiting for him to fall on his face, and he gives a beautiful shiur. He finds out what happened, so he throws them out. He says, you guys, I forbid you from entering the base of Medrash. You can't come in. They're outside on the park bench.
Punishment.
Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Natan throw in questions into the base medrash through the window. The students read the questions. Sometimes they know the answer. They got a question, they didn't know the answer. So they said, whoever threw in the question, we don't know the answer. And 5 minutes later, the answer was thrown in. Now they knew what was happening. So the students said, we can't go like this. We are inside, and the Torah is outside. They view it as if the biggest Talmudic minds are outside, and what are we doing inside? We're in the yeshiva to learn Torah, and the people we have to learn Torah from are outside. So they went to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and they said to him, this is not going to work. He said, well, there's got to be a punishment. So he said that from now on, Rabbi Meir will never use his name. In the Mishnah, when we refer to Rabbi Meir, we'll always say, Acherim Omin. The other guy said, that's Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Nassan, we're going to erase his name. In the Mishnah, Yesh Omin. Some people say, that's Rabbi Natan. Now, who wrote the Mishnah was his son, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's son. When Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, Father, Rabbi Meir, I'm taking his name out from all the Mishnah, I'm going to remove his name. He says, yes. He says, why? He says, because if I would have let them succeed in what they were going to do, you would not have a job today. You're only going to be the Nasi because I'm your father, but because I took care of these guys, these rascals, these guys, these traitors. So, you read this Gemara, and you got to step back and you say, okay, let's see, rabbis against rabbis, knifing rabbis in the back. Where do we ever hear this story? Does this story ever happen today? Every day,
Still the same.
This must be a story from 2,000 years ago. It couldn't happen today, right? Or when we hear about it today, we say to ourselves, what a horrible community we live in. I bet you 2,000 years ago this never happened. You know what the answer is? Same old, same old. Things don't change.
People don't change.
People don't change. It's often what I tell people. People don't change. Although my wife says over the years I have mellowed. I'm not sure what that means. I'm afraid to ask her. But sometimes people mellow. When they get a little bit older, not that I'm old, when people mellow, but you're right, people don't change. People don't change. It just amazing. So it says that Rabbi Meir was a descendant from Esau. He came from Edom. So Yaakov says, I'm so afraid I might kill Acherim. Acherim refers to Rabbi Meir, because he was called Acherim. Rabbi Akiva also came from Gelut, from Edom. So they say that he was afraid, that he was fighting, that Yaakov Avinu was trying to protect his brother Esau. He was really protecting people like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva. There's one medrash that says Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan. He was trying to protect these people from happening. Okay. Let me go a little bit over here. I want to show you something before you leave, though. Well, I'll show it to you in a moment. A few things I want to share with you. Number one, it brings down in the Sefer Otzer Palos HaTorah that there was a minhag that before you ever left on a trip, you would read Parshas Vayishlach. It was a protection. You know, we read Tfilat HaDerech. In those days, they didn't have Tfilat HaDerech. They read Parshas Vayishlach. That says that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi once went on a trip, and he had to leave in a hurry, and he forgot to read Parshas Vayishlach, and he didn't make it to the dock where the boat was before he got robbed and beat up and everything else. He says, I have regret that I didn't read Parshas Vayishlach. Had I read Parshas Vayishlach, none of this would have happened. So the first thing it says is that we read Parshas Vayishlach. The other thing he brings down over here is Yaakov refers to Esav as master, Adon, 8 times. Therefore, Esav had 8 kings rule over Seir before there was even one king in Israel. By Yaakov making Esav the master, Esav was zochet to 8 kings before anything else. So that's something very interesting. The other thing I found interesting, because I have a son-in-law named Shner. Look what it says over here. It says that in the days of the Gemara, it brings us down really from the Noida B'Yehuda. The Noida B'Yehuda says that if you look in the Gemara, Mishnah Gemara, nobody had 2 names. He says it's an American shtick to give people 2 names. Nobody had 2 names. Avraham was Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Yaakov's name was changed to Yisrael. It wasn't called Yaakov Yisrael. We have many boys today named Yaakov Yisrael. He says most people have 1 name. How many names do you have?
2.
2. How many names do you have?
1.
I have 2. But he says that most people have 1 name. In the Gemara, everybody had 1 name. You had someone Abba Shaul, which means my father Shaul. Maybe that was a way of saying kavod. But you didn't have people with 2 names. Everybody had 1 name. So he said there was a problem. He says there was a family where they had a baby boy. The father wanted to name the baby Meir after his father, who had passed away. The mother wanted to name the baby Uri after her father, who had passed away. And they don't name 2 names. They weren't going to name the baby Meir Uri. So they went and asked the Shaila, and I guess they went, where did they go? To the Yam Shel Shlomo. It's written in the Marshal, the Yam Shel Shlomo. And he came up with a new name, Shner. Shner is Shin Nun Yud Aleph Vav Reish, which really says Shnei Or, 2 lights. Meir, the root is light, and Uri, or, the root is light. So he created a new name, Shner. And Reb Shner Zalman from Loudly was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Reb Shner Kotler was one of the Rosh Hashivas of Lakewood. And there are many people named Shner. But the root of the name Shner was a new name, stands for 2 lights, Meir and Uri, because they didn't use 2 names. So I found that to be very, very fascinating. You know, there's an old story, I think I've told you this, there was a city, a mythical city called Chelm, Chelm. Have you ever heard of the city of Chelm? The city of Chelm were people who were supposed to be very, very smart, but they were very, very silly. They weren't very smart. He says, for example, in the city of Chelm, there was this very hill that the horse and buggies, when they went down the hill, used to fall off the side. So they had to figure out how to fix this problem. So what did they do? At the bottom of the hill, they built a hospital. That's the problem. That's how they solved the problem. You know, instead of building the road wider or putting a fence, that's how the city of Chelm did it. So a couple comes to the rabbi in Chelm, the big chacham of Chelm, the wise man of Chelm, and they're fighting, arguing back and forth, and the rabbi says, "Why are you fighting about? We just had a baby boy, mazel tov, mazel tov. What's the problem? We can't agree on the name." Well, that's the problem. The husband says, "I want to name the child after my father." He says, "Okay, what was your father's name?" Chaim. Okay, Chaim, nice name, after your father. The mother says, "No, your father was a horse thief. He was a robber. I'm not going to name my son's not going to have Chaim after your father no matter what." Okay, the rabbi says, "So tell me, what would you like to name the child?" "I want to name him after my father." "And what was your father's name?" "Chaim." So he says, "What? I'm not going to name Chaim after your father. I'm not going to name Chaim after your father." So the rabbi says, let me think about it. Comes back half an hour later, he says, "I thought about it. We're going to name the child Chaim. That's the compromise." So they start screaming, "Chaim after who?" He says, "Well, we'll see. If he grows up and he's a horse thief, he's after your father. And if he grows up and he's a good guy, he's like after your father. You know, he says that was the solution. We'll see. We'll see who we're going to name him after. We'll see who he grows up like. You know, the city of Chelm, how they solve their problems.
The hospitals.
Okay. You know, what are we going to do over here? The Gemara asks over here, the Medrashim, the Meforshim ask, after the whole city of Shechem, the story with Dinah, who did Dinah marry? That was the question.
Yosef.
So one answer is she married Shimon. Shimon for a while.
Dinah
Shimon was like a brother.
Dinah is Yaakov's daughter's daughter.
Right. Well, Yosef married the daughter from that. That was
Yeah.
Osnat.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, this is the Dinah is a daughter
Dinah
of Yaakov.
was the daughter.
Yeah.
So the first thing was, who did she marry? So one answer was married Shimon. The Gemara says that she married Eov. The famous Eov, who had all the Yisurim. Dinah was his wife. He brings down from Rav Avraham Azulai. Rav Avraham Azulai was the father of the Chidah. And he says that after Shechem, she married Shimon. When Shimon died, she married Eov. Then she married Noval, and then she married David HaMelech. Then she married Turnus Rufus, and then she married Rabbi Akiva.
Wow.
And she lived a long time. Maybe it was her neshama that had kept coming back. That's what the father of the Chidah said. So I found that to be very, very interesting. The next thing I'm going to talk to you for a moment, but next week I'm going to talk about it more. It's a very difficult topic, and next week we're going to talk about this at length. When Yaakov came back after he had his whole confrontation with Esau, and he settled in Shechem, how long was he living in Shechem before he went back home to his parents?
7?
How long?
7?
2 years.
Yeah.
He lived in Shechem for 2 years.
Yaakov.
Yaakov. During those 2 years, his mother died. And only afterwards he went home. So let's understand this. He's been away for 34 years. He comes to Shechem. Now he has 4 wives, 12 children. His parents live either in Hebron or Beersheba. If you look at a map, from Shechem to Beersheba is maybe 3 hours walking. 3 hours. He doesn't make the trip. He hasn't seen his parents for 34 years. His mother protected him. His mother loved him. His father, it's a different story. We're going to talk about that. It raises the question. You're not home for 34 years. You're 3 hours away. You're married. You have children. There are grandchildren. Why didn't he go? That's a very difficult question. Obviously, he was angry about something. He was angry. Maybe because Sarah told Avraham, throw Yishmael out, and kept Yitzchak home. And but Rivka and Yitzchak threw the good kid out, Yaakov out, and kept Esav home. He was angry about something. And we're going to go into that. And I'm going to show you psukim in the Torah that will shock you. That you've read, but you never read it the way I'm going to read it to you. He brings down over here that when Rivka died, who buried her? He says the Goyim buried her, the Bnei Chet. He brings down from the Ramban, I'll read you this very quickly. Haramban kosav devorim nifloim, unbelievable things. When Rivka Imenu died, she was buried at night. Avraham wasn't there, he already had died. Yitzchak wasn't there, he was blind, he couldn't maneuver. Yaakov never returned home. And Esav was away, and they were afraid to bring Esav and let him know, because if they would have brought Esav, everybody said, look at that. That's what Rivka lived her whole life for, to have a kid like that. So therefore, not to embarrass her, they decided, let's just bury her ourselves quietly. So nobody was there. Yitzchak wasn't there. Yaakov wasn't there. Esau wasn't there. You know, I was at a funeral today, and the rabbi spoke. He spoke very well. And he said, you know, sometimes I don't know what to say at a funeral. Sometimes I get up here and I say, she made great cookies. And she made a really good banana cake. That's what I have to say at a funeral, because there's nothing else to say. At least for this lady, she must have been a good cook, but all her children are Shomer Shabbos. He was able to say nice things about the family, and the family is a reflection of the mother. Reminded me of this. At the funeral of Rivka, what did they say? Her husband, he's blind, he's home. Yaakov, we haven't seen him for 34 years. Bless you.
36.
And now it's 36 years, right? 36 years. We haven't seen him at all. And Esau, we don't want to talk about him. So Sarah had a beautiful funeral. Rachel had a very moving funeral, Kever Rachel. Leah, we don't know much about her funeral, but we assume was very moving as well. All the children were there. Rivka, middle of the night, buried by Goyim. And Yaakov loved his brother, but he wasn't there. Next week, we have to figure out why. Not an easy question, and it's a disturbing question. And then we understand why. I mean, understand one thing. For all the time that Yaakov was away, those 22 years, Yosef was away. Now, why was Yaakov being punished? His parents sent him away. Every minute he was away in the house of Lavan, he was doing kibbut av v'ein. So why was he punished? Because when he came back, he didn't go back home. It means that all that time you were there, you weren't really respecting your parents. So the fact that he got punished for Yosef tells you that something was wrong over here. We will talk about it. Emir Hashem will talk about it. Not so easy to understand. 3 women died at childbirth. Rachel was one. The second one was the wife of Pinchas in the story in Shmuel. And the third one was Michal bat Shaul. Michal, David HaMelech's wife. He asks, who built Kever Rachel? He says, Yaakov started it. But he says, the old structure, Shlomo HaMelech built. He says, if you go to Kever Rachel, today you can go, the stones, the original Kever Rachel, if you look at the stones, they're the same stones by the Kotel HaMaravi. He says, Shlomo HaMelech built it. He says, who finished it off beautifully? Reb Moshe Montefiore. He says, the Tsar, the great Moshe Montefiore, finished it off completely. So that's how Kever Rachel was eventually built. But next week we will have a lot of things to talk about in Parashat Vayishlach, but I will talk to you about this question that I asked you. One last thing, you can turn off the tape if you want.
Can I do it?
If you want. This is what the Gid HaNosha looks like. I took it out of an animal. When I used to do Shechita years ago, I trabered it. So this is the actual Gid HaNosha from the hind quarter of the animal. You can see it's a muscle. It's a vein muscle. It has no flavor. Flies don't come to whatever it is. It doesn't. That's what the Gid HaNosha. You can actually come by if you want. You can touch. This is the actual Gid HaNosha from the hind quarter of an animal.
This is the thing which
Right here. This is from the back hind quarter of the animal.
Side.
The sciatic nerve. This is it. Mm-hmm. I went into the hind quarter. I took a knife and I trabered it. I pulled it out and I cut it out.
Wow.
That is the Gid HaNosha. So you have an opportunity to see actually the Gid HaNosha.
Are you allowed to show this on Shabbos?
You could, I guess. It's not
It's not
muktzah.
muktzah?
And it has no flavor, so if it falls into a pot of soup, you can take it out. The soup is kosher. But if you lose it, it's not batzah afil be'elef. It's one of the things is the Gid HaNosha. This is the Gid HaNosha. If you leave it out, flies don't come to it. It has no flavor.
I heard they write the Sefer Torah with this, yeah? Not write it, yeah.